We're going to get started then. You ready then?
I think so.
Great. Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, my name's Pat. My wife and I own DNS here. I'm the one you'll see behind the counter most of the time. Thank you very much for coming. We're happy to have Noah Humfeld here tonight to talk about walleye and pike on the Madison chain, winter fishing. Hopefully we get some ice soon so we can all get out there and enjoy it. Noah is a very talented guide. If you like what you hear here and want to, some more in-depth, introduction to all this stuff, hire him as a guide. He does a great job and he really knows what he's doing. He also has a YouTube presence, and he just started a pretty cool YouTube series called Shop Talk. I've been enjoying that myself, so check that out. But yeah, we're gonna do, he's got a little PowerPoint, and we got some show and tell stuff. So we'll be turning the lights on and off, depending on what we're doing. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and let's give it up for Noah.
Well, thank you very much, Pat, for the introduction. Thank you to everybody who came out tonight. I really appreciate it. Always a good time talking fishing with other degenerates like myself. So yeah, my name is Noah Humfeld. I own and operate Madison Angling Guide Service. I've been guiding for almost 7 years now, full time, which is mind-bogglingly crazy, but pretty stinking cool. I'm sure everybody in here is ready for ice season. Show of hands. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to put my hand down because I don't even have my boat put away yet. I'm not ready, but we're getting there. And this was a good way to kind of kickstart that. I had to dig all my ice stuff out and start getting stuff together for tonight. So it'll be here soon enough. So tonight we're talking fish with teeth. And if you've ever been to any of my talks before, you probably know that I like to keep this pretty open, pretty light. As you guys have questions, just shout them out. Don't hold them to the end, because if you're like me, you'll forget in 30 seconds or less, because I have the attention span of a squirrel. So, talking fish with teeth, specifically the Madison chain of lakes, but a lot of this stuff is applicable to all kinds of places in southern Wisconsin. So I guess we're going to jump right in. We have some show and tell stuff here tonight. Got some hook setting devices, tip-ups, baits, all that stuff in conjunction with the PowerPoint here. And Ranger is going to be helping me out in the back. He is my lighting guy tonight. So while we're doing PowerPoint stuff, we'll kind of dim the lights so it's easier to see the screen. And then we pass stuff around and flip the lights back on so it's easier to see stuff. Because this all has actual real hooks. And I know everybody in here is cool with hooks, but it sucks passing hooks to one another, especially if you don't know what you're being handed in the dark. So let's not put hooks in each other tonight. Any questions about that? I'm really good at pulling hooks out, so if anyone gets hooked, you're good. All right, so anyone who's new to the Madison chain here, you want to hit the lights for me? Sweet. I love that. We have some unbelievable fishing here on the Madison chain, whether you like to fish panfish. How many of you came here for Brian's talk last week, Zuki? So you guys know how amazing pan fishing is here in Madison, but the pike fishing, walleye fishing, bass fishing, and the muskie fishing, absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, Lake Mendota has a 40-inch size limit on northern pike, so they get very, very, very big. And usually early in the year, late in the year, and through the ice is hands down the best time to target those fish and have a really good shot at catching some of these big pike. There's almost 20,000 surface acres of water that make up the Madison chain. That is a tremendous amount of water, and so much of it is fishable. So again, we're talking walleyes tonight, we're talking pike. So just to throw a fun number at you, there is somewhere over 500,000 walleyes that have been stocked just in Lake Mendota since 2010. That is a crap ton of walleyes. So if any of you have been fishing Mendota, obviously the last few years, it's almost like a plague of walleyes, right? You go out smallie fishing and you catch 15 to 17-inch walleyes till you puke, right? Those fish do get bigger, believe it or not, and we're starting to see more and more of those fish growing up, which is really cool. But there is obviously a little trickle down from Mendota down to Monona, and there's also walleye stocking in Wabisa, and they kind of work their way up to Monona as well. So lot of really awesome potential to catch some big fish. Biggest walleye I had in the boat this year was 29 and like 7/8. It was like between 3/4 and 7/8, and we couldn't get it to go 30, and it was really sad. But the number of mid to upper 20-inch walleyes that we caught this year was just stupid, unbelievably cool. So very much looking forward to ice fishing this winter. So let's talk about walleyes. Where are my walleye people? Okay, just about everybody. You don't like walleyes?
What about wannabe walleye?
Sure.
All right.
That's why we're here, right? Okay, all right. So the biggest thing for me is seasonal progression and fish movement, right? You can't catch them if you don't know where they are and if you're in the wrong spot, right? So it's who's been out walleye fishing the last few weeks here, the last month, fishing at night, casting from shore? A few people, okay. So obviously those fish are up shallow right now, right? They're anywhere from a foot of water to 5, 6, 7, 8 feet of water, right? And there's a reason for that. That's usually where more of the warmer water is during the daytime. The sunlight comes down, hits the lake bottom, warms it up. There's usually some residual weeds. There's lots of bait fish in there. That's where the predators go. So early ice is really no different than what we're seeing right now, except for the fact that you can't cast anymore and you have to drill a stupid hole to put a line somewhere. So generally speaking, early ice, and I'm calling early ice in this case, basically now through maybe about the second to maybe third week of January or so-ish. Obviously, every year is different. A week ago, it was looking like we were probably going to have some ice by like next week, like good ice, but it warmed up. We got all the snow coming tomorrow. Probably going to push things back just a little bit. But overall, I'm looking for shallow water right away, especially the first 3 weeks of good, safe ice. I am fishing shallow water. So typically looking for weeds, good green weeds, and we'll get into that a little bit later here. Not all weeds are good, but looking for good green weeds or some kind of transitions, hard to soft bottom transitions. Anywhere in that basically 10 feet of water or less. So back in college, once upon a time, I used to be a smart person. I went to school, got an expensive piece of paper, and now I go fishing for a job. But when I was getting that piece of paper, there was a lake we used to fish down near Dodgeville, and at night, the walleyes used to work up right next to this boat launch. We were super lazy, didn't want to drag our stuff everywhere, so we just fished right in the boat launch. But it had access to the basin. I mean, it was just like straight down, 45-degree angle, boom, and it's all rock going down this drop. So what we used to do is stagger our tip-ups, right? Put one out in like 30 feet, 25, 20, 15. And one night I put one in 1.5 feet of water. And my buddy thought I was wasting one of our very valuable lines, and no, don't do that. That's stupid. Go put it out in 10, 15 feet. Every legal fish we caught that night was on my 1.5 foot deep tip up in January, like middle of January. So don't ever be afraid to go shallow. There are no rules. Fish go where they want to go. If that's where the food is, that's where the fish are going to go. So early ice, I'm fishing pretty shallow. So anywhere you have a nice shallow weedy flat. So again, places that we're casting for walleyes right now. And I'm going to talk about a few spots, obviously. And if you guys have questions about spots, I'm happy to answer those. But, Tenney Park, right off the breakwater there, that's a killer spot. Lake Farm, usually early ice there. Pan fishing's pretty crazy. The walleyes are in there too. Olbrick, north end of Monona there. As long as the weeds look good, there's walleyes in there. Absolutely. So early season, I'm looking for good green weeds or hard to soft bottom transitions. Now, there's always going to be exceptions to that rule, right? If we go out on Mendota tomorrow morning, we could go out to Brearley, we could go to Second Point, we could go to Dunn's, we could go off of Govs, and we could go catch walleyes out in 30 feet of water. Absolutely, totally could. But a lot of those fish do push up shallow. So don't rule out the shallow water stuff. Plus, you're probably going to have a lot of that to yourselves. Everyone thinks walleyes, deep water, we got to go deep. If you stay shallow, usually you don't draw too much attention, which is kind of cool. But now all of you know where I'm going to be, so dang it. So obviously, as things go on, things change a little bit. Going from kind of that mid-January to late February, that's when I start pushing out deeper. And part of the reason for that, again, is the weeds. So everyone in here, obviously, we all fish, right? So we probably know a little bit about weeds and stuff and the ecology of a lake. So A lot of times what happens, and it varies so much year by year, and the weather dictates so much of this, the weeds can either be a very good thing or they can be a really bad thing. So obviously, in a good way, they provide cover for bait fish, cover for predators, and they also produce oxygen, right? Photosynthesis, CO2, oxygen in the water, yay, happy fish. The other thing that can happen is they can go into aerobic respiration where they start drawing oxygen out of the water, and even more so when the weeds start to die and decompose, let's not knock that over, they'll actually start to pull more oxygen out of the water. All that bacteria and stuff that's decomposing can create an incredibly anoxic environment, and the fish aren't going to be there. So if you find slimy, crappy weeds, don't waste your time. Get out of the weeds. It's time to go fish somewhere else. So typically, again, that mid-January into February, I'm spending more time out deeper. I'm going out to that 15 to 25 feet of water, fishing rocks, kind of more, I guess, what you would think of as a more traditional walleye spot. So that's kind of how I break down where I'm fishing. Obviously, every year is different. The weed growth changes all the time, I'm sure, the last couple years. Anybody who's fished Madison on a regular basis, you've seen the weeds change a lot. So that varies a lot year to year, but we'll just kind of see what this year brings, I suppose. So again, later in the winter, that's when I really start looking for bait fish. That's where I really start looking for schools of perch, schools of bluegills, things like that are moving around kind of out in open water. And that seems to be where a lot of those walleyes kind of hang out mid to late winter. Any questions on that? Nothing. All right. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. So obviously I'm going to be handing some stuff around here. But as far as tip-ups go, obviously walleye, pike, tip-ups, right? We have to talk about tip-ups. I like them. They're fun. It's fun to run after a flag. There's something nostalgic about it. I get it. It's fun. As far as the setup goes on my tip-ups, I like multitaskers as far as things I can use for multiple species in multiple different ways. So I keep it really simple with all of my tip-ups. I run pretty much all beaver dam tip-ups purely because that's just the one that I like because you can get them with the Jolly Roger flag, and that's cool. I have no brand allegiance to one tip-up or another. I just like these, especially the really old ones, like the really old ones. Awesome. So I run 30-pound tip-up line on all these. I run Suffolks on most of them. It's all Dacron. It's all basically the same thing, but I run 30-pound on all my tip-ups. And as far as walleyes go, about an 8 to 12-pound fluoro leader. I don't usually go too much heavier than 12. The few times that I'll go over that, usually I'm on like big fish water, or I'm fishing areas that I'm running into lots of pike and I'm sick of getting bit off. So 8 to 12, kind of depending on the day. Obviously, if the fish are really finicky or you're dealing with really clear water, go to a lighter line, and so on and so forth. A little dirtier water, you can get away with heavier line. As far as hooks go, I'm pretty sure everybody in here fishes trebles on a tip up. Pretty much anybody use single hooks? Okay, few people. All right. Okay. I play around with both, but if we're out fishing and I got customers and we need to catch fish, we're putting treble hooks down. So as far as like a specific hook size goes, just something that's appropriate for the bait you're using, right? There's some days when you're using fatheads, other days you're using shiners, blacktail chubs. Maybe you're super cool and you have a hookup on like little baby perch. If anybody does, you are going to murder the freaking walleyes this winter. But little baby perch, little 3-inch perch would be perfect. But something that's just appropriate for the size bait you're using, okay? So for me, that's anywhere from like down to a size 12, which is pretty small. So that'd be more for like a fathead minnow on a really finesse kind of crappy day of fishing. Up to about a size 8 or 10 is about as big as I go. And that's about what I've got on this one. So I'll pass this guy around. I'm sure everybody's seen a tip-up before, but we'll pass it around so you guys can check it out. Feel free to pop it open, do whatever you want. That's totally cool. Typically, I run about an 18 to 20-inch leader. You could certainly go longer or shorter if you want to. Walleyes are pretty stupid. I think we give them a lot of credit for being these really picky, finicky fish, and at times they definitely are, right? So for those of you who troll suspended walleyes here in Madison. I know there's a couple people in here. There's one in particular, but there are certain days where there is a bait or a color that is like, that is the bait. And if you don't have that on all your lines, then you're SOL. So on days when things are really, really light, finicky, light leader, smaller bait, smaller hooks, and we'll get into my secret weapon for that here in a second. So one thing that I do a little different with my tip-ups that I haven't seen a lot of other people do is, again, I like multitaskers. I like tip-ups, I like rods, I like reels that I can use for multiple different presentations and multiple species. So I'll use my Pike one here real quick to show you guys, if I can get this off. All right. Ranger, you want to hit the lights for me for a second? Thank you. So on the business end of my tip up here, you'll be able to see this when I pass this around. I actually put a snap on here. So this is a VMC crankbait snap. It's got kind of a weird teardrop shape to it. And little egg sinker, about an 1/8 ounce egg sinker right on my braided line here, down to my leader. And what that does is obviously lets you switch leaders real quick and easy. And the reason I went with this snap specifically is you can kind of see how it's sort of a teardrop shape. When you're pulling it up through the ice, the taper, the shape of that snap doesn't want to catch on the bottom of the ice. It just pops right around it. That took a little bit of trial and error to figure that out. But as that tip up goes around, you guys could probably see that snap on there. Cool little trick for swapping leaders out really quick. And you can use the same tip-ups for pike, walleyes, whatever, trout, whatever the heck you want in the same day. Just unsnap it and go. So that's about it for that. Any questions on tip-ups? Nothing. Am I just that good at answering questions? Yes. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. I use 2 different types of leaders for pike. One of them's probably going to scare some people. The other one makes perfect sense. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you feel you need insulated tip-ups at all or not too much?
Yes, so that's a really good question. Pretty much, excuse me, anytime that I'm dealing with temperatures usually below 20 degrees or 25 degrees, I do use hull covers. Yep, and then when it's snowing too. Any day that's snow, even if it's just drifting snow blowing around, yeah, they're worth it. And if you want to be super cheap about it, you don't want to pay $7, $8, $9 for one, go to Menards and buy carpet squares, like samples of carpet, and cut a hole in the middle and a little notch in it, and you can slide it right around the spool of your tip up and use that as a hole cover. I did that in high school. It sort of works. It's not great, but it works. But yeah, hole covers, definitely. Absolutely. There's nothing worse than having a tip up frozen into the ice and you see the fish taking off and you're kicking it, trying to get it out, and then you break your tip up or you bend the spool or you know, it's just, yeah, hole covers are cool. Hole covers are a really good idea. And one other thing to add too, windy days, tip ups. We're going to talk about some hook setting stuff here in a minute, but windy days, tip ups, hands down. Totally the way to go. Hook setting devices. Who uses jaw jackers? Automatic fishermen. Okay, few people, not a ton. The people who use them, do you like them? Yes, yeah, eh.
Just made them.
There, yeah, PVC and coat hangers and stuff, or
PVC wood, but
wood, sure,
hangers.
nice, and it works perfect. Yeah, why go spend the money on when you can just make it, right?
$8 a piece.
There you go. Should talk to him after this and get the hook up on some hook setters. So I got 2 different versions of that here. Obviously the automatic fisherman, not a sponsor of mine, but I like them. They're cool. All these products kind of have their time and place. And for a long time I was hardcore tip up, tip up, tip up. And on the days where you get a lot of dropped flags, right? You've got, let's not drop that either. So on days when they keep popping flags, right, and you get to it, and it pulled about 12 inches of line out and dropped it. How annoying is that? And you know it's a walleye. Like, for sure it's a walleye. And it could be a mid-20-inch walleye that just came up, grabbed your shiner, and ran off with it, and laid down on the bottom, and crunched down on your treble hook, and was like, nah, and just spit it out. And it's probably just laying there right next to your sucker, or your minnow. It's just like, what the hell just happened to me? So on the days when fish are doing that kind of stuff, I always bring autos. Just even if I'm not planning on using them, I always bring at least a couple. So if there's a flag that keeps on popping and we cannot catch that fish, we're going to catch that fish. So the beauty of this, for anybody who's never used one of these or seen one of these, is that it's very, very adjustable to your conditions. So obviously you got a little ice rod on here. You can use whatever rod you want. I would not suggest using a super like high-end rod in one of these, but just your run-of-the-mill whatever. I think this is the Automatic Fisherman brand one. As far as line and stuff goes, I like mono on these. It doesn't freeze as easily as braid does. A little more forgiving, especially if people don't know how to fight fish, which is a lot of people I fish with, which is fine, and that's why you come with me, right, to learn some stuff. So I like mono for that. I've got a really long leader on this. I don't know why it's so long. I don't know what I was doing last time I used this, but apparently I wanted to be real stealthy. So I do have a little swivel there, because obviously minnows swim around, they do crazy stuff, things get twisted. A little swivel is not going to keep a walleye from grabbing it. And this guy, I'm sure some of you are looking at this like, what's wrong with your bobber, dude? It's in 2 pieces. This is actually a line de-icer. You can put a mixture of, I think it's glycerin, glycol, and something else. Like I said, I used to be smart. I don't do chemistry anymore. But basically an antifreeze solution in this to keep your line from freezing. So you can use a hole cover with this if you want to, or you can just use this. And what will happen is basically this will freeze into the hole, right? But your line can move freely through it. So even if it's super, super cold, you can still get a hook set, which is the key. And then with this, you could just straight up curb stomp the thing into the hole and you're good. Just be careful not to stomp on your line. But yeah, it's a really, really, really useful tool when it gets cold. So walleyes, yeah, they have teeth. No, you don't need a steel leader. No, you don't need titanium. Fluoro is just fine. So basically the way these work, you treat it just like a tip up. You got our treble hook on here. Put your minnow, whatever it is you're using on there, send it down to the depth you want, and essentially, it's like a mousetrap for fish. So you pull this little arm up, and you kind of have to sort of fine-tune this a little bit. I have all these numbered, and I have all my rods numbered, so I know which one goes with which. But basically, when a fish grabs it, bam, it sets the hook on them. And this rod and this base don't match, but if you do it right, it should have a pretty good snap to it. And what's cool with these, unlike a tip-up, man, I'm going to fight with this thing. There, it kind of works, is with a tip-up, as soon as they grab it, bing, flag goes up, right? It's immediate. Boom, they, flags up, they feel resistance right away. With this, you can actually set this so they don't feel any resistance for basically as long as you want. So you can delay your hook set, which is pretty cool. So on fish that are really finicky, especially like walleyes or trout, if anyone fishes up at Devil's Lake for brown trout through the ice, these are freaking awesome for that. Super, super fun, by the way, if you've never done it. So basically what you can do, there's a couple different ways to do it. So if you buy the whole kit thing, it comes with like a little bobber dude. And what you're supposed to do is basically thread it in between your first 2 guides here. And this serves as basically a little counterweight to hold slack in the line. So here, I'll turn it this way so you guys can see a little better. And if anybody wants to check this out, I'll have all this stuff up here, so feel free to come up here. So basically, you can put a little bit of extra slack in the line, so that way when the fish picks it up, they can run with that slack. They don't feel anything. And as soon as it tightens up on them, so we're going up, 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 and it's really fun watching these things because you can call your shot. And it's really fun with people who've never been ice fishing before, like, that rod over there is going to go, and they're like, no, it's not. And it keeps creeping up, 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 and then when it gets tight, bam, hits them, game over. And it helps if you put $20 on it. You'll always win. But, what's that? So yeah, so I try to set my drag obviously tight enough that when the rod goes off, especially since we're using mono and we got a little stretch, I want it tight enough that it's actually going to hit them hard enough to set the hook, but light enough that if they do take off, they can pull a little bit of line. Yep, and that's the one nice thing about this too, is you've got the rod here to fight them a little bit, so there's a little shock absorber just in the rod sitting here. So you can get away with your drag being even just a little too tight. It's a little more forgiving than some other devices in that sense. So light enough that if you do hook something real big and they need to go, they can go, but heavy enough that you're not going to get any slippage when it pops and sets the hook. Yep. So like I said before, when you pick something like this up, typically they have like a little bobber dude that sits, it's supposed to sit right in line here, actually on your line. I don't really like that. I've had some issues with those. When the rod goes off, depending on how much slack is in it, wraps around the blank and actually gets hooked on the other guides, and then you're screwed. Then your drag doesn't matter because it's just locked down and see ya, bye-bye. I haven't had a rod go down a hole, but I've had two that were really, really, really close to going down a hole on some big pike. So that's why I switched it up, and I took a little piece of 051 bucktail wire, some really crappy, cheap foam bobber things I found on, I think, eBay. I got like 200 of these. And I just bent it in with a couple little hooks, and I just hook it onto the line. So when this thing goes off, it just flings this somewhere. And if you lose it, big deal, because I got 200 of them for $5, even though you shouldn't litter, pick it up. But now there's nothing on your line, nothing to get tangled, nothing to get wrapped up. It's boom, out of your way, don't worry about it, reeling the fish, done. So it's a pretty freaking cool system. It's actually really, really, really fun. And you get to fight them on a rod and reel, which is super cool. Any questions on the autos? Nothing. All right. Moving right along here. I spent way too much time talking about that. So the next thing, all the fun things with flags. How many of you have ever seen a finicky fooler before or heard of one? Okay, quite a few people. They're pretty cool. And obviously there's lots of different versions of this thing. I think there's more ice fishing gadgets in the world than there are probably any other kind of gadgets. Because all you do is sit and wait in the cold staring down a hole and have way too much time to think about better ways to catch fish, right? So I think this is one of those things, but it does work really well. So what's cool about this is you can actually use it in a couple different ways. So I have a jig rod in here right now, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to use it. So basically, you can use this thing like a hook setting device if you want to. There's a little arm down here. You hook it on there and, fish grabs it, bam. But the way I like to use this is for super, super, super finesse presentation. So if I know it's going to be a light bite, so again, stock trout, crappies, panfish, but especially walleyes, and I know the fish are being jerks, this works really, really well. The key with this, though, is calm days. Wind and these things don't really get along super well, so calm days. But basically the way this works is you're going to, the iFish Pro tip-ups, how many of you have seen those? If you watch YouTube stuff like Jay Siemens and Uncut Angling, they use a lot of those. It operates pretty much the same way. So essentially, this flag folds down here on a little piece of wire, open the bail, drop your bait down to where you want it, loop your line around that same piece of wire, and then when you get a bite, boop, flag goes up, reel is in free spool, they can just swim away with it, and then walk over, close the bail, reel down on them, bam, catch a fish. So these are pretty stinking cool. I bring these along with me a lot when I'm out perch fishing. It's a quick, easy thing to set up. They don't take up a whole lot of space. So if we're chasing perch around, especially like Wabisa and Monona, if we're in 30 feet of water or less, put a tip up down or an auto or one of these things, because guess what's out in there with them? Pike and walleyes, a lot of them, and really big ones. So that is kind of the quick and dirty on the finicky fooler. And again, awesome crossover thing. You can use it for pike, walleye, panfish, whatever you want. And they fold down super, super small. Again, not a sponsored product. I just really like it. But they fold up super tiny. You can fit a whole bunch of these in a bucket. Done. Bam. And they go together that quick. So really, really efficient use of your time. Yes. Usually I'm going with some kind of like a shiner or something. I'm going to bring stuff along for walleyes, typically. Usually just a handful. I'll get half a dozen or a dozen just to have them. You never know. Or a little tiny perch. If you don't kill them, bringing them up. All right, let's talk about jigging stuff. Where are my jigging people at? That should be like everybody. It's the coolest way to catch them is jigging, right? You can get as in-depth on rods and reels and line as you want to. I like to keep it, again, as simple as possible. I like rods I can use for multiple things. In fact, when I pulled this rod out of my case this afternoon, getting it set up for this talk, I still had my whitefish stuff from Green Bay on here. So I use this rod for walleye, I use it for crappies, I use it for bluegills, I use it for whitefish. It works awesome for everything. So as far as like the super custom fancy ice rods and stuff, I think I have a couple somewhere, but I just don't care that much. As long as I can feel I have the right action and I got the right line, right leader, I'm happy. So for me, anywhere from about a 28 to 30 inch medium power rod is my preference. And really it's all preference, right? Even open water jigging. I know guys who still jig with mono over braid, but they catch fish and they're happy with it, right? So if it works for you, run it. For me, I like something that has a little bit softer tip, kind of a more moderate tip to it. So this particular rod is actually an Okuma rod. It's actually this is actually a really cool one. So if you don't want to spend a bunch of money on ice rods, pick one of these things up. It's actually really cheap. It's called a Trio Ice kit. So it actually comes with 3 different blanks that you can swap out. So this is the big one. There's kind of more of a medium and then like an ultralight. They're actually pretty sweet. I beat the crap out of this thing and it didn't break. So I'm pretty impressed with it. If I didn't break it, I don't think anyone here is going to break it. So I do like something with a little softer tip to it, especially, again, crossover things, right? I want to use this for multiple different things. This actually makes a halfway decent dead stick. It's not perfect. You know, if that's your jam, obviously you could get something with a much softer tip, a much more moderate action, but it actually does work pretty well as a dead stick, but it's also got plenty of backbone for jigging as well. So again, anything that you're comfortable with. As far as length goes, I don't like super, super long rods personally. So 30 to 32 is about my cutoff personally for jigging rods. But again, anywhere in that medium, even in some cases medium heavy applications. And again, depending on the baits you're using, which we'll get into in here in just a second. So for spoons, lighter applications, this thing is absolutely perfect. For heavier stuff, you know, if we're talking about slab wraps and bigger jigging wraps and stuff, heavier bait, stuff that you're snapping more aggressive, I'll step it up to something just a little bit heavier than this, a little bit beefier, a little bit heavier tip. As far as the line goes, I like 10-pound braid. Keep things sensitive. I want a quick hook set, so braid lets you do that. Leader, pretty much the same as the tip-ups, either like 8 to 12-pound fluoro. When I go up to like Green Bay, Beta Knock, places like that where you're dealing with zebra mussels, which we do have here. So keep that in mind. If you're chafing your line a whole lot, it may be a good idea to jump it up one line size. So like, you know, snap jigging and stuff in the summer with plastics, I usually use 15-pound because you're rubbing on the rocks and stuff and the zebra mussels. Ice fishing, not so much unless you're banging bottom, but just something to keep in mind. But anywhere in that 8 to 12-pound, I usually go 12 just because, you know, you're jigging, you're using something a little bigger. There's a good chance you're going to hook a pike or a muskie or something. So 12 gives you a little more insurance policy on that. And then kind of the trivial question here is, do I put a swivel on it or not? Okay, especially with like jigging wraps and stuff. There's so many different schools of thought on that. You know, you're adding another mechanical device to your setup here, another failure point, another thing that can snag on the ice, right? So a lot of people don't run swivels, and that's totally cool. But the only point I want to make with that is you got to think about what your bait is doing when you stop moving it, right? So how many people have been watching an aqua view and you're jigging bluegills or crappies and you can see your jig popping around, it looks awesome, and then you stop it, and then it just starts doing this. And the fish are looking at it like, dude, no. And then goodbye, right? Well, jigging wraps and spoons do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're fishing panfish in 5 feet of water or walleyes in 30 feet of water. That's something to keep in mind. So I prefer, as much as I hate to do that, I do prefer to put a swivel in line, just a little tiny dude. I'll pass this around so you guys can check it out. I've got it about 2 feet above my spoon here. You could put it right next to the spoon. I honestly don't think they really care, especially Madison walleyes, because they're just hungry and they just eat stuff. But I do like to put a swivel in here just to try to eliminate some of that jig spin down towards the bottom there. Any questions on that? I know I blew through that super quick, and you guys are probably expecting, yeah, he uses like $200 custom rods, and no. Not in this case. But you don't have to spend a ton of money to have a really nice rod and something that you can do a bunch of different stuff with. Yes?
For jigging, are you looking at the same areas that you're using tip-ups in?
Yeah, absolutely. So early season, shallower water, you can absolutely jig shallow water. There's no reason why you can't. That being said, Low light conditions, typically for shallow water jigging, in my experience, are more beneficial times to do it. Just because they are spooky, things are a little spookier midday. You're probably going to be better off using hook setting devices or tip-ups midday. But in the kind of early and late hours of the day, absolutely. Yes, definitely. And then obviously deeper structure too. And that's probably the most popular way to do it, and probably where most people spend their time jigging is deeper water. So yeah, definitely. Shallow water, absolutely. All the same locations. Any other questions on jigging?
Not on jigging, but on the tip-ups and
Yes.
how far off the bottom are they going?
That's an awesome question. That's a really good question. So I usually set my stuff about 2 feet off the bottom, and there's a reason for that. So a lot of people fish super, super tight to the bottom, because if you drop your flasher down or your graph, usually when you see walleyes, they're pretty tight to the bottom, right? And a lot of fish are tight to the bottom, and obviously you got your dead zone, all that stuff. For me, I am looking for active fish. I don't like window shoppers. I don't want to sit there and try to make a fish eat. I want one to just freaking eat, man. And usually the more active fish seem to be up off the bottom a little. And if you can coax them up off the bottom, a lot of times they're going to eat. So like when you're jigging, right, and you raise it, same thing, except it's on a tip up and you can't sit there and raise it, right? So just keep your bait up a little higher and they'll come up and grab it. Yep. So the important thing to remember too, if you look at a walleye, pike, a muskie, any predatory fish, their eyes are looking forward and up. They're not looking down. They're looking forward. They're looking up. So yeah, I usually run my stuff about 2 feet off the bottom. Sometimes I'll even go 3-4 feet off the bottom. Yep. No, that's an awesome question. Pike are a little different though. Yes. Ooh, that's a good one. That's where it gets real tricky. So the 1.5 feet of water, I will tell you, is a huge struggle with a tip up, especially because your leader is usually too long and you can't get your swivel and your weight out of the spool. So sometimes you have to go to like a little bitty leader. I do prefer like the finickies and the autos for the super shallow stuff. But yeah, about 6 inches off the bottom, 8 inches off the bottom, because it's so skinny. And you honestly could probably put it 4 inches under the ice and they'd probably still grab it. Pike do, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that's a good question. I like it. Any other questions on that?
What colors or types of jigging lures do you use?
The ones on the back side of this piece of foam. That's actually where we're going next here. So as far as jigging baits go, I keep things really, really simple. Actually, Ranger, would you mind hitting the lights for me, dude? Thank you, sir. All right, a little easier to see here. So I keep things super simple. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have the same baits in your jigging arsenal. One bait that I actually really, really like, and I fish at open water quite a bit too, is that one on the very top there. It looks a lot like a jigging wrap, and in a lot of ways it is. It's actually called a Fish Lab Biominnow Jig. Got the sweatshirt tonight. It's actually really cool. So it's like a jigging wrap on steroids. Instead of the plastic tail, it has a stainless metal tail that's way harder to break. Believe me, I've tried. It doesn't have the front hook, so you're not snagging on the ice and you're not getting hung up on as much stuff. Big wide gap hook on the back, and it just looks cool. So that's a new one. I've done very, very, very well on that. Obviously, the OG jigging wraps. I usually fish the 2-inchers. I can't remember what ounce that is, but basically there's like the 2 3/4, and then you start getting into the really big stuff. I like the 2-inchers. You could go bigger. The 2-inchers seem to catch everything though. The classic Northland buckshot spoon, gotta have some of those. Rippin' wraps, that might be a little bit different. I'm sure I see a few nods here. A few people are like, oh yeah, sure. We use them in the spring up on Green Bay, right? Snapping them and stuff. That's cold water. Why wouldn't they eat them through the ice? They totally do. The slender spoons from Custom Jigs and Spins, I like those as well. Obviously, they're quite a bit smaller, so that's for more finesse presentations on days when the fish are just a little more lethargic, or we're doing kind of crossover stuff. Maybe we're chasing perch and walleyes. You can catch both on something like that. The OG Swedish Pimple, got to have some of those. The Forage Minnow spoon's basically a buckshot spoon without a rattle, and to tip them or to leave them raw is kind of the question, right? Do we put a minnow head on it? Do we put some waxies on it? My answer is sure. Just try it, right? You let the fish tell you what they want. There's definitely days when it seems like bulking up makes a big difference. And sometimes bulking up doesn't mean that you put a bigger bait down. It means just adding something to it, right? So there's been a lot of experimentation over the last couple years with that, where You know, a buddy of mine is banging on him with a jigging wrap, like, you know, a 2-inch jigging wrap with a minnow head. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with getting my hands wet putting minnow heads on, so I'm going to run like a size 5 ripping wrap, something about the same bulk, about the same size, and he still continues to kick my ass, right? So there are days when it seems like having a little, whether it's the scent, it's the action, there's just something about it that that can definitely make a difference. So also waxies. I mean, if you don't have minnows and all you have are waxies work too. I think they kind of have a similar effect. So I like to bring a little bit of everything along. And again, if we're jigging for walleyes, you're going to be putting out flags, right? I mean, if you're jigging, you might as well use all 3 lines. Put out another 2 lines. So you're going to have some live bait is what I'm saying. So feel free to pop a couple minnow heads off and just try it, especially if you get a lot of window shoppers. They're coming up, looking at your stuff. They're not eating it. Just a minnow head. So especially on like the bio minnow and the jigging wraps, just a minnow head right on that bottom treble hook. And sometimes just letting that thing sit, you know, bing, 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 and then a fish comes up on it, and they're looking at it, looking at it, looking at it. They're not eating it. Just kill it. Just let it hang. Dead stick it, and a lot of times with that minnow head, they'll eat it. Yes, sir?
Do you ever put minnow heads on the ribbon wrap?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's a thing, for sure. Especially the little itty-bitty, like the ultralight ripping wraps. I actually have one on my secret foam thing here that I'm going to pass around with these baits. Yeah, especially on the ultralight. Yeah, I like minnow heads on them. That being said, they do fall really slow, and that's something to keep in mind too. When you bulk something up, especially with a minnow head, something that's almost neutrally buoyant, the bait doesn't necessarily weigh more in the water, and it is going to slow the cadence of your bait down slightly, which can be really good, especially with spoons, and especially with that little rip and wrap. That can be really, really good. You want to hit the lights for me, dude? Thank you, sir. Alrighty, I'm going to pass those around. So, one thing to keep in mind, there's another one I didn't add to it. I'm going to pass these around too. These are also sizes that I like to use. The slab wrap, the Rapala slab wrap. It's the biggest thing on that piece of foam. That's actually a killer bait. It's a great lake trout bait too. And it works open water as well, but that's one I started using a couple years ago as well and have had a lot of success with. And if you notice my color scheme here, a lot of chartreuse, a lot of perch. Honestly, color is the last thing that I worry about. It's more so action, profile, and where I'm fishing. That's what I'm mostly focused on. Color is probably the last thing I'm trying to figure out in the equation. So, any questions on that?
On your spoons, do you
Yes.
ever you find that swapping off the treble to like a different color or a bigger size makes a difference?
I haven't found hook color to make a statistically significant. I actually used to write this stuff down. I haven't found hook color personally to make a difference, but size, yes. And I have found in a lot of cases, a lot of spoons especially come with hooks that are just way too freaking small or too big. Exactly.
I think the buckshot stock has too big a hook on
It's pretty big. It's pretty big. Yep. So I agree with you on that. And that's another thing to keep in mind, and thanks for bringing that up, is don't be afraid to modify this stuff. If it just doesn't seem right, if the hook seems too big or too small, swap it. Try it out. See if it works better for you. So a good example is those buckshot spoons. I used to use those for jigging catfish on Mendota through the ice, and we used to just bend the hooks out on them on every other fish. So I actually started putting bigger split rings and hooks on them, and they work great. And you catch walleyes on them too. So yeah, definitely. If it doesn't seem quite right, upsize or downsize. But one thing to keep in mind too is make sure you check it, test it. Don't just drop it down and assume that everything's good. Actually run that bait in the water to make sure it still looks the way you want it to look. Because there's some baits that just don't react well to bigger or smaller hooks for whatever reason. You know, there's a little tipping point there where it either kills the action or it overworks the bait because it's too light. So keep that in mind when you do that, but definitely consider swapping hooks if they just don't seem quite right. So we'll keep rolling along here. Again, any questions, feel free to shout them out here. So as far as timing goes, right, when should I go fishing? The stupid answer, go when you have time, right? Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to be able to get out for like a midday bite, especially if you got work or something and life and whatever. And maybe you only have a few hours in the middle of the day. Should that deter you from going fishing for walleyes? No, probably not. Early ice, it might be a little bit tougher. In fact, it'd be a hell of a lot tougher. But as we get further into winter here, there's no reason to not go walleye fishing in the middle of the day. Go for it. Go when you have time. Overcast days, which kind of brings me to this point, overcast days, especially overcast days midday, are usually really good walleye days for midday fishing. For whatever reason, especially if there's snow cover over the ice, the fish do seem to be a lot more active midday when you have some cloud cover and it's overcast, a little darker out. So in that sense, I guess walleye sort of do fall into their stereotypical deep, creepy, low light fish thing. I have noticed that, especially around here. And otherwise, if you're on the right fish, especially if you're on active fish, you can catch them all freaking day long, especially the perch, like I mentioned before. If you can find a school of perch, and again, we'll touch on depth and all that stuff, barotrauma and stuff, but if you can find perch in that like 30, 35 feet of water or so or shallower, you're going to find walleye, you're going to find pike, everybody's going to be chasing the food. So if you're on those fish daytime, you're going to catch walleyes as you go, definitely. Which brings us to deep water, depth of water, right? We all know if you pull fish out of deep water too quick, you kill them, barotrauma. They come up too quick, they don't have enough time to decompress, they blow their swim bladders out, and unfortunately they die. For me, my safe cutoff is 30 feet, just to be perfectly safe, and that is my bait is down 30 feet. That is as deep as I will send a bait down. Even then, you got to be a little bit careful. If you do notice that you're pulling fish up and maybe you're pulling them up a little too quick and they are starting to bug out, bring your stuff up. You can still fish the same school of fish, but let them come to you, and in doing so, they can help start regulating their swim bladder. They're less likely to have barotrauma. But just kind of keep in mind, especially the size of the fish you're catching. So on Mendota, especially Mendota, it does seem like a lot of the walleyes tend to school in year classes, right? If you catch one 15-incher, you're probably going to catch 86 15-inchers, right? Or at least it seems like it. And every once in a while, you'll get a big one or some smaller fish. If you're on a consistent school of like 15 to 17 and a half inchers, move. Unless you're just out to catch them, right? But if you're fishing deep and that's all you're catching, it's probably time to move. It's hard to leave fish to find fish, but odds are you're probably not going to run into a ton of legals if you're pounding a bunch of little fish. You'll catch some, but you're going to weed through so many little fish, and it's honestly not worth potentially killing them, in my opinion. Yeah, I guess that's all I had on that slide. Any questions about walleyes and stuff? And obviously, as we go, if you have more walleye questions while we're talking pike, throw them at me. But anything? Wingra for walleyes? Ooh, there used to be. Dude, I haven't fished wingra in like 2 years, and I have a really weird story why, and I'll tell you after. That's not Facebook appropriate. So I don't fish wingra anymore because the strangest human beings I've ever run into, other than all of you, I'm just kidding, usually hang around wingra boats, and I'll tell you guys that story later. But I know there used to be some. There also used to be gigantic largemouth in there. I'm sure there's still some, but it's that I don't know. I know there's pike in there now. There hardly ever used to be pike in there. I had a friend of mine catch a 38-inch pike on a sucker 2 years ago. Actually, it was the last day I ever fished there. Yeah, we got a 38. I think it was a little over 38, like 38 and a half inch pike on a sucker. We were so excited. We were like, yeah, Hannah's going to get her first muskie. Yeah, we were out all day, super cold. It sucked. And it was a giant pike, which was still really cool, but she was so sad. And I'm like, how the heck did that thing get in here? And why is it so big? It's wingra. They shouldn't be that big. Yes?
When you go into a bait shop to get minnows,
yes.
the specific kind that you look for, you get?
The most active, best-looking minnows they have. I'm usually going with like a small to medium shiner for the most part. I usually don't go much bigger than a medium. Unless you really want to swing for the fences, then I'll even go to like a smaller, large shiner. So usually nothing over 4 inches. Around here, that's kind of my cutoff. Will they eat something bigger? Yeah. But your hooking percentage seems to go down a little bit, choking on a big bait. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Chubs. Yeah. So small suckers like the pike mix suckers, the little dudes, those are awesome. The blacktails, I like early ice. Early ice for blacktails. Doesn't mean you can't catch them all winter on them, but I like them early ice. I use a lot of those now, and I think it just kind of translates into this early ice and then moves on to shiners. Honestly, you could probably use whatever you want. You put a cheese curd down there and probably catch one, to be honest. So here's a quick question. How many people have fished cut bait on Mendota for catfish and caught walleyes on cut bait? Okay, there's a couple people. Yeah, so imagine that. You throw half a 5-inch bluegill on the bottom with a 3/0 circle hook in 2 feet of water up by Cherokee Marsh, and you're banging on walleyes. The middle of the day, sun shining, beautiful day, catching walleyes. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. They will eat all kinds of weird stuff, so don't overthink it. So as far as the minnows go, anything goes. Whatever you think is going to be best for that particular day, go for it. Do it up. All right, the other fish with teeth, pike. Let's talk about pike. Where are my pike people at? Everybody should raise their hand. Pike are cool. Pike are fun. Pike give you stitches. Only once, and it was a lot of stitches, but it was totally worth it. So again, seasonal progression, right? That's where we're going to start with. Ranger, you want to hit the lights for me, dude? Thank you. All right. So we're looking at a lot of the same stuff here, especially Mendota. And I know I keep coming back to Mendota, but it's literally right there. And I spend a ton of time on Mendota, so I'm talking about Mendota. So if you guys have questions about the other lakes, not Wingra, shout them out. So as far as fish movements go, and again, the seasonal progression here, early ice, and again, I'm using kind of that first ice to about mid-January or so. Shallow, weeds, right? Green weeds, right? Same places the walleyes are. They're hanging out in the same places because that's where the food is. They're eating the same stuff. That's where the fish are. Finding pike is not that hard, to be totally honest. I like weed edges when I can find them, especially a nice stark weed edge. So like Warner Bay, especially, right where it dumps off into the basin. That's always good. You could go out there right now and pound on pike, I'm sure. I can't because I sort of blew my motor up, so I haven't been able to go fishing for a week, which sucks. But yeah, Warner Bay, actually right out in front of Tenney Park is another great spot. Anywhere you have a nice solid weed edge. But what about rocks, right? How many people fish Governor's Island and drag suckers around out there and bang on pike, right? Those fish are hanging out on the rocks. And where do those big pike go in the summer? I'm like, I sort of kind of know, but I also want to know if anyone else knows. What I really want is to do a radio telemetry study on big pike in Mendota, just to follow them around for a year and see where they go. So I run into a lot of them suspended, especially when I'm fishing for walleyes. So oftentimes, like along Second Point, midsummer, pulling lead core with like Salmo hornets and little flicker shads and stuff, killer for walleyes. But usually once you get off the tip of Second Point and you dump off into that open water, 40, 50 feet of water, a lot of times you spin the boat around to make another pass and a rod doubles over and it's usually a big pike. And they're just hanging out there in the abyss, usually somewhere near the thermocline. They like that cooler water. But a lot of those big pike just suspend out in the middle of nowhere, right? And that's why a lot of times you don't run into them in the summer, or fewer of them, right? We see them in the spring, we see them in the late fall, and we see them in the winter. So a lot of those big pelagic fish do slide up onto a lot of rock structure, and that's where we do run into a lot of those big fish over by Governor's Island, right? We literally have the deepest water in the lake, and 100 yards away is shore, a foot of water, right? Super deep, super shallow. So those fish can just slide up in there wherever they want to go, wherever they're happy, wherever there's food, wherever the water temp's to their liking, slide up, slide out, easy access. And that's where a lot of those big pike go. And that's where I typically spend the second half of my ice season, kind of from that second week of January through kind of the end of ice season, is some of that deeper structure, rock piles, things like that. That doesn't mean that you're not going to find big pike in the weeds. That certainly does not mean that. But overall, usually the biggest pike that I've pulled out of Mendota specifically have come off of rocks or some kind of rock to soft bottom transition. And then going back to the weed thing here too, again, late ice, check the weeds. Send a treble hook down on your auto, your tip up, whatever, and pull some weeds up and see what they look like. If they look slimy, get out of there. Don't waste your time. Slimy weeds are bad. Tip ups and the leader I run on them. So again, I run the same tip ups for my entire setup, whether it's for walleye, pike, trout, whatever. All I really do is swap my leader. So usually I run either a 20 to 30 pound fluoro leader, and I know what some of you are thinking. Are you crazy? Yes, but that's not what we're here to answer. Generally 30 pound fluoro works really, really well. I tie my own leaders. Doesn't mean you can't go buy pre-made fluoro leaders. They work fine. But I like 30-pound fluoro, and again, an appropriate sized hook for the bait, right? So if you're using like Cisco's or something, you're probably not going to use a size 8 treble hook, right? Use something a little more appropriate, like a size 5 or size 4, treble hook. So I do like to use kind of a weird bend in my treble hook. So how many of you have heard of Excalibur hooks, like in lures and stuff? Few people. This is some old school stuff. Okay, a few people. All right. So do you guys remember the hooks that they made that they like twisted the point, they rotated the points? I do that to my treble hooks. And that sounds weird, but hear me out. And I'll pass this around so you guys can see it, and it'll make a little more sense. So what they used to do, and there's really no good way of showing you with my hands, I'll just pass it around so you can see it, but basically imagine you're looking at the point of your treble hook, right? Just a straight, perfectly straight line. Take a pair of pliers, bend it over about 15 degrees or so, and then do that to all 3 points. And what that does effectively is it widens the gap of that hook, and typically a wider gap hook, you get more leverage on the hook point, you get a better hooking percentage, right? Like big EWG hooks for fishing plastics and stuff, when those first came out, game changer, right? Hooking percentages went way, way, way up. You can do that with treble hooks too, and you can certainly do that with walleyes. Pike seem to be a little more stupid, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. A little less picky, I think, is a better way of wording it. You know, walleyes will grab it and they'll kind of chew on it until they feel something they don't like and they'll spit it. Pike just swim and eat at the same time. They don't care. So when you open up the hooks on your walleye hooks, I've had more drops doing that than I have just leaving them alone. But with the pike, it does seem to increase hookups pretty well. Granted, you're using a treble hook and it's a pike, so you're probably going to hook it anyway. But that does work very, very well. And it works very well with hook setting devices too. The reason being, sometimes they will fly in and just smash a bait, right? I mean, you've seen videos of pike eating stuff underwater, and you've probably caught a lot of pike. So when they hit stuff, they hit it. Even if it's mid-January and it's, you know, negative 30-degree wind chill, they will still smack the crap out of something. So even if you have a lot of slack set in your, let's say, your automatic fisherman, they may hit it so freaking hard that slack doesn't do you any good. That slack is gone now. And when that thing pops, you better hope that thing's got the best chance possible of getting that fish in the corner of the mouth. And I do think that opening up those hooks just a tiny little bit makes a little bit of a difference in that. I'm just going to pass this leader around so you guys can check it out. Ranger, you want to hit the lights, dude? Thank you. So I'll pass that guy around. So that's just a 30-pound fluoro leader, probably about 22, 24 inches or so. No fancy knots or anything. I just use a regular clinch knot to the hook. You could do a loop knot, rapple a knot, whatever. But you can see I just barely twist the points of that hook, and it is enough to actually open up those hook points, open up the gap, and it does seem to make a difference.
How are you hooking up your bait on your hook?
That's a good question. So I like to leave as much of the hook exposed as I possibly can, and typically, so like on a shiner, let's say I've got, you know, a big old, Pat scoops me up a big old thing of giant shiners, right? Big old shiners. Typically, I'm hooking it right in front of the dorsal fin. Most predator fish try to eat head first, and that's another thing. I'm going to backtrack here for just a second. On the automatics, when you're fishing walleyes, I like to hook the minnows right behind the head. They almost always eat them head first. Almost always. There's exceptions to every rule, right? But that way, you're at least getting the hook in their mouth on that first initial grab, and that's kind of what I'm shooting for. So I like to have the hooks more head forward than towards the tail, personally. And I know people that hook them in the tail because it makes them kick and do all kinds of, I do that for crappies, you know, crappie minnows and stuff, hook them in the tail. For pike and walleyes, I like to keep it closer to the head. So usually right in front of the dorsal fin for me personally. Just once. Yep. So I do want that bait to potentially tear free. It's kind of like a quick strike rig for a sucker, right? For muskies. I kind of want to tear the hook out of that bait. Not quite so much with pike because, you know, they swallow the thing. It's gone, right? A 40-inch pike could fit a freaking walleye that big down its throat, no problem. But I do like to just clear the bait off the rig so it's just the hook in the fish's mouth. There's no other stuff in there to get caught. There's nothing keeping that hook from getting pinned the rest of the way. So I like to just barely hook it as light as I can. Obviously not light enough that it's going to get off, or if a walleye grabs it, it doesn't just tear it off. But I like to keep at least 2 of those points fully exposed. Yes, sir?
So when you're pike fishing and you get a flag,
Yes.
you like to run over there and set
Almost immediately. Yep. Yeah, almost immediately. So because I'm using treble hooks, and obviously I care about fish. I care about all fish, but especially fish with teeth. I want to minimize the number of fish that do swallow hooks. And so going back to the single hook thing, right? Outside of treble hooks, you can absolutely use octopus hooks. You can just use a straight up bait holder. You don't have to use treble hooks. And the hooking percentage is pretty good.
What do you think about circle hooks?
That's a really good question. That's actually something the last couple years I've been telling myself I was going to experiment with and never have. I think maybe we should try it this winter, see what happens. Because again, you've got the wide hook gap, right? So your hooking percentage should be pretty good. You're not going to be able to gut hook them. In theory, it should work just fine. The hook set's going to be the key, though, and I think that's the tricky part, especially when you're hand lining something, is your first reaction is just to pull, right? There's no rod absorbing any of that energy that you're transferring to the line. You're just putting straight up torque on the line. So with a circle hook, I think the hook set might be just a little trickier, but it's going to be more of just a gradual pull and kind of lean into them. Start out slow and then kind of give them a little more power, and then I think you're good. Just maintain tension, and I think you're good. Which is how I like to set the hook on these anyway, especially with the lighter fluoro. The 20 to 30 pound fluoro. I don't jerk it. I just start pulling. Just nice, steady pressure. No pull, just pull. Because what do they do when they fight? They shake their head. So as long as you keep tension on them, they're just going to dig the hook in deeper, and they're good. So yeah, I do try to get to them as quick as possible, and that's where the automatics are actually really cool too. So we'll talk about that here in just a second, but these are great for ensuring that you're not getting swallowed hooks, which is pretty cool. Any questions on the tip-up stuff?
What's your thought on like the quick strike rigs or stinger hook?
There's no reason not to use them. For me, it's more of a if you can get to that line quick enough kind of thing. So the more hooks you add, obviously the more chances there are for hooks to get in gills and down their throat and stuff. Yeah, and especially if you have a really big bait too. If you're using something pretty big, 2 hooks is usually a pretty good option, or some kind of a stinger. Absolutely. Yep, definitely. And another thing too, so we were talking about, where we're setting lines and stuff with the walleyes in the 1.5 foot of water. I like to stagger my lines a lot with pike. Now, shallower water is typically where I'm going to run baits right under the ice, and I'm sure some of you have heard of people doing that, and maybe you're just a little too afraid to do it, right? Because why would you sacrifice 1 or 2 of your lines to do something stupid, right? It does work very well, but I typically only do that in relatively shallow water. So anywhere from about 12 feet of water or less, even 15 feet of water or so or less, I will run baits right under the ice. I'm talking like 6-8 inches underneath the ice, right there. And the reason for that is what happens to dead fish. Usually they sink to the bottom, right? And as they start to decompose, they float. And pike are very opportunistic feeders. They will eat literally anything that'll fit in their mouth. How many of you have caught one on a hot dog, on a tip-up? All right. Yeah, so see what I mean? They're pretty stupid, right? Doesn't have to be wiggling and alive. You can catch them on just about anything. So the reason for putting one right under the ice is, especially later in the season, and that's typically when I do most of that, is kind of late ice. Bluegills, perch, whatever, things that die off over the winter. Eventually, as things start to warm up a little bit, and you get a little more sunlight, things warm up, decomposition starts, those fish float up underneath the ice, and the pike just come along and grab them. And muskies do too. Yes, sir?
How often do you check your minnows and pull them up?
I usually check them every 15 minutes or so just to check them out. You can go out and do a fish drive. How many of you people do that? Anybody? A couple people? Go just do a lap around your tip-ups and make your minnows swim around a little bit. And it's amazing how many times it works though, right?
We get a lot of four-wheeler hits.
Yeah.
We drive our four-wheelers.
Yep.
We get hit, just
Yeah, do a fish drive, right? Wake them up, make your minnows move it. Because for all you know, you could have 12 lines out. There could be 10 fish looking at 12, out of your 12 lines, there could be 10 fish looking at them, thinking about it. But you driving by, upsetting your minnow and getting it to swim away, dude, it works. It's weird. I've done it on Koshkanon quite a few times, and it works with walleyes too, which is really weird. But that's a thing. So as a rule, about every 15 minutes, when it's really, really cold out, absolutely every 15 minutes. Just to check on making sure everything's not iced up. If I have a tip-up spool that is sticky, like too sticky, and it doesn't matter how well you lubricate these and how often you service them, on a stupid cold day, these will still get sticky, especially on the newer ones, the OGs. I've never had a problem. But the newer ones, every once in a while, they get a little sticky. If they're getting sticky, I usually will swap. I have way too many tip-ups. So I'll usually swap them out for one that's not as sticky, just to make sure that when you do get a bite, that thing is going to go off, and or they're not just going to rip the minnow off and swim away. So every 15 minutes is typically what I'll do. On a warm day, you could let them soak for 45 minutes or an hour. It just kind of depends on the other activities going on the ice. Sometimes you get a little sidetracked and don't really stay on top of it as often as you should. So again, baits right under the ice. I do like to stagger baits. As a rule of thumb, yeah, most of the time they're creeping down by the bottom. Again, they're looking forward and up, right? So they're looking this way. So fish slightly above the fish, right? Another thing that works too is actually just laying a dead bait on the bottom. It sounds weird, but it works really, really, really well. In fact, a lot of people do that muskie fishing over in like Pewaukee and Okauchee and kind of over in Oconomowoc. That is like how they catch muskies in the fall on suckers. Dead suckers, get a perfectly nice, alive, very expensive sucker, bonk it on the head, and let it sit on the bottom, and that's how they catch muskies out there. And the pike in Mendota, I keep going back to Mendota, but the pike in Mendota act so much like muskies. It's really weird. Like they come in on the L turn, they will eat at the boat. They are the weirdest freaking fish. They are the weirdest pike. But they will absolutely eat bait off the bottom too. And that works pretty much all winter long. So if you ever just want to do something different and you've got a bunch of lines out and a bunch of buddies or whatever, send one all the way to the bottom and just let it go. Let it sit. And that is where a single hook, I prefer to use a single hook on that just because, you don't know how long it's going to take for that fish to grab it and actually swim away, trip the flag. That thing could have that thing coming out the other end by the time that fish actually pops the flag. So on those, I do like to do the single hook, just a really big octopus hook or really like oversized drop shot hook basically, instead of a treble hook. Oh, you could put it anywhere you want to. You could suspend it on the bottom, right under the ice. Doesn't matter. I don't know. Where was your hot dog, depth-wise? Like,
Only 3 feet under the ice and 5 feet of water.
There you go. So anywhere, pretty much wherever. Yep. Generally though, dead bait right under the ice or on the bottom. Personally for me, and then mid-water column is more live bait. But whatever, switch it up. All right, back to hook setting devices. I could not find my pike rods. I'm pretty sure a buddy of mine has them. I use the exact same automatic fisherman, except I do go to a slightly beefier rod. This thing is pretty light. I think this is a 27-inch light, which is way too light for big pike. But I go to a slightly beefier rod, more of like a medium heavy to a heavy. Same size reels, like 1,000 to 2,000 size spinning reel. On really, really, really cold days, I have like a set of reels with 10-pound mono on them for really cold days. And on any other day, basically anything over 20 degrees, I like to run braid. 20-pound braid works just fine. On the business end though, the big change that I make with these, and again, we're going to a heavier rod, so when that thing sets the hook, bam, it hits them pretty quick and hard, right? So with the fluoro leader, I think you have a better chance at snapping fish off. In fact, I have snapped quite a few fish. Oh, sorry, dude. I have snapped quite a few fish off with the fluoro leaders. So I actually go to a titanium leader for the autos. More specifically, Terminator titanium wire. That's a Rapala brand. It's impossible to get now, so I'm sorry I even put it on there. But there's actually another brand. It's called Not Too Kinky. I'm just relaying the message. It's a nickel titanium alloy, so you can actually like tie knots with it, which is really cool. Works great for casting jerkbaits at night for walleyes. You don't get bit off by pike and muskies all the time. It's a really thin diameter too, so if you're worried about spooky fish in clear water, don't worry about it. It's super, super thin. You cannot break it, and you can literally tie knots with it. You don't have to crimp it or anything. You can just tie like a regular fisherman's knot, clinch knot, tighten it down. It won't cinch all the way down. It's titanium. You're not going to tie a cinched knot with metal, but it'll tighten down plenty far, and it will not come undone. I have never had it fail. So that's the only real difference I have with the hook setting devices is a heavier rod, braid on really cold days, 10-pound mono, and then the Terminator or Not Too Kinky leader material down to your treble hook.
Tip-up leaders
Oh, super, super easy. Where did that thing go? Is it still floating around somewhere? Oh, cool. Here, I'll show you right now. Super easy. And I can pick my stupid bobber up. Thank you, sir. All right, so the easiest way to tie a loop knot, just a basic loop knot, is, so we'll pretend, this is our tag end, the one that has the loop on it. Double up your line, tie an overhand knot, get it wet. There you go. Loop knot, done. That's it. Just an overhand knot. Works just fine. Good to go. And it's not coming undone. 20 to 30. Yep. And if you're scared of the 20, just run 30. 30 is fine. Really, I mean, you could go to 40, 50. But by that point, especially with fluorocarbon, it gets kind of wiry once you get to the heavier diameters. So for the salmon people, we use 40, 50 pound fluoro for flasher flies because it's more wiry and it gives you better action on the fly behind the flasher. Same thing happens to your minnows. So if you have a leader that's way too rigid, that bait can't move around and do its thing. So I like to go a little bit lighter. But 30 is a safe bet. If you're scared of 20, 30 is perfect. 30 is really good. And these are so much freaking fun to fight pike on through the ice. Way more fun than doing it by hand. Yes, sir.
So how heavy a wire are you running with that not too kinky?
Good question. 20 to 30. Yep, and it's very, very, very thin. So you could even go upwards of 40 or 50, and it's still really, 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 really thin. But usually 20 to 30 works just fine. So I kind of mentioned this earlier with the walleyes. Not so much about pike, but Mendota, obviously 40-inch size limit. It's managed for big fish, right? And the 18-inch walleye limit, which I think should probably be changed, or we should have a slot limit. It's built for big fish, right? 10,000 acres. It's super deep. It's built for big fish. Lake Monona has some really stinking big pike in it too. Especially if you spend any time muskie fishing out there, you've probably run into some really big pike, especially if you're trolling open water. There's some big stinking pike out there. And they act very similar to the fish on Mendota. The only exception being that they do tend to be more weed-related fish for the most part. At least that's what I've kind of found. So places like Squaw Bay, Turville Bay, obviously the triangles, Monona Bay, and then, basically anywhere there's just good weeds. So up by Old Brick's another great one. The whole east side of Lake Monona off of Tony Watha. Thank you. Gosh, what's that park called? I can't think. Wildhaven Park in Monona is another really, really, really good one on the east side of Monona. And you can see here, this is my buddy Jim. Hi, Jim. Jim's not here tonight. Jerk. We were friends, but he's not here. He's got a big old pile of perch from Lake Wabisa sitting next to him, and I was like, hey, let's put a tip up out just for fun. And he's like, why? And I'm like, why wouldn't you? And then, bam, he got a super chunky pike. So he's got a pike in his pile of perch, whatever. So again, that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? We're out perch fishing. We're specifically targeting perch, but what follows the perch around? What eats all the perch around here other than us? Pike and walleyes and muskies. So always a good idea to throw just an extra line down. Now, if the fish are really moving, right, you're hole hopping out in the basin and the fish are just moving, it's a lot harder to do that. But if you're finding schools of fish that are kind of hanging tight to the bottom, not really moving a whole lot, especially really cold days, chances are the predators are going to stick around and you'll probably catch a few. Go back. All right, so we already kind of talked about the live versus dead bait thing. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I like both of them. They both work fine. If your minnows all die and you're like, crap, bummer, just send them down. You're going to get bit. Don't worry about it. And that's pretty much it, guys. Any more questions? We had some really good questions tonight. And I do have all this stuff up here, so please come up and check it out. Yes, sir?
So I've been out perch fishing on Mendota, and
Yes.
that's pretty deep water.
Yep.
And I'll see pike cruising like almost,
Oh, yeah.
5 feet or right under the ice.
Yes, sir.
Fish active and catchable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And, and those fish do just roam open water, right? So that's what they're doing typically most of the summertime, right? Those pelagic fish are just out there, right? They're eating white bass, they're eating whatever they find suspended, bluegills. In the wintertime, absolutely. And I think a lot of those fish are probably looking for dead stuff right underneath the ice. And again, they're down just a little bit so they can look up at the ice. So you can see more being a little bit further down. So yeah, those are very catchable fish. Absolutely. So yeah, if you're out perch fishing and you have a high mark come through, few feet under the ice or even 10, 15 feet down, I don't know, send a slab wrap down or something, you know, you're probably going to catch it. It's probably a big pike. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Muskies too. Early ice, like, well, it was looking like we were going to be able to go catch muskies through the ice. Now it doesn't, but yeah, if you're just like chilling in Monona Bay in the triangle and you look down and there's like a 45-inch fish looking at you, you can usually get them to go. If they're that high in the water, a lot of times they'll grab it. So unless it's after the end of December, then don't do that. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Mendota being the trophy lake, and we have to have 40 inches for the northerners there.
Yes.
And you get the other lakes around here. Is that ever gonna change? Is that
That's a really good question.
DNR question, or?
That is a DNR question, and as a former DNR employee from a long time ago, it's probably not going to change, because if it's not broken, don't fix it, because you know what I mean. Does that mean that it's not broken? No, and I do think that some people might agree and maybe disagree with me, but there's definitely a sense that Mendota is very top heavy right now as far as predators go. It seems like there's a lot more predators than there is prey, in my opinion, especially with dumping, you know, the better part of 500,000 walleyes in there over the last 10 years. Plus, you know, the smallmouth, the pike, you know, how long does it take a pike to get to 40 inches? At least 15 years, right? At least 15 years. So you're looking at a very top-heavy system, which kind of scares the crap out of me, and that's why I think maybe we should do something different with the walleyes. So, and you see a little bit of a trickle down, I think, like the smallmouth are definitely, it seems to me, skinnier than they used to be on average. Definitely not carrying the weight that I think they used to carry, in my opinion. We did get a couple absolute freaking giants this fall, which was really cool, but it's pretty sad when you're just touching or just exceeding 5 pounds and you're like losing your freaking mind. Because it used to be like that all over the place, you know, and that has changed a lot. And I do think it's because there's just too many predators in the system. Now, that being said, I did run into more smaller bluegills this year out on deeper structure and stuff on Mendota than I ever have, at least in the last probably 15 years. Which is really cool. So that means we at least a handful of years ago had some really good recruitment. So we should have a pretty solid forage base. And there's tons of little itty bitty perch too. So the perch are definitely making a comeback, which is amazing to see. I don't know that it'll ever be what it used to be, but they are coming back. So as far as the management goes, it's the DNR, man. You know, and that's what's cool about what we have here, especially being in Dane County, is the DNR seems to be very open to trying new things. So a prime example is the muskie stocking, right? So we stock pretty much all the fish in Monona and Waubesa. A few go into Wingra. But we have two different strains. We have the Wisconsin strain and we have the Leech Lake, Minnesota strain. I just flipped everybody off on accident. I'm sorry. I like you guys. And that was really cool. You know, the Cap City Chapter Muskies Inc. pays for the leechers and the Wisconsin DNR pays for the Wisconsin strain fish. And we did that as a growth study to compare the two to see which ones grew bigger faster, which is pretty cool. So they're willing to do stuff like that and at least hear you out, if nothing else. You know, and the spring hearings are a great place to voice those concerns and opinions and potentially put new regulations into place. I know there is some stuff going on with panfish. I think it's specific to Mendota. I think it made it to the next step, but it hasn't gone through yet. It's something about changing the limit, I think, to 15 instead of 25 on Mendota, if I remember right. That's a question for Brian, I guess. He would know better than I do. What's that?
I think it's just 10.
Is it 10? Okay. I thought it was somewhere between 10 and 15.
Right, it only went to the first stage.
Right, it hasn't gone all the way through yet, which, you know, that could be a really, really good thing for Mendota. You know, build the forage base up again and maybe we'll see some heavier fish. I don't know. But that being said, Mendota's always been kind of a research lake for the most part. So, yes, sir.
If somebody died and made you king, what would the walleye regulations on Mendota be?
Ooh,
On Mendota.
on Mendota. That's a good question. I would probably, I would like a slot, personally. Now, that being said, most cases where you have a slot limit, it's because you're protecting that reproductive slot, right, from usually 20 to about 26 inches or so. Once they get over 26, the egg viability drops dramatically. So, you go up to De Pere, right, in the spring, and you're allowed one fish over 28 inches. Well, it's because that female is pretty much done and over with. 75% of her eggs probably aren't viable. Go ahead, take it. But places like the Wisconsin River that have a naturally sustaining population, slot limits have made a huge difference in the number of fish. So, look at Prairie du Sac, right? From Sauk, basically Lake Wisconsin downriver. It's Dink Central, right? We can go out and catch 500 saugers and walleyes this big any day of the week. Hop in the boat, let's go. We can do it. I'll take you. But as soon as you cross that dam up to Lake Wisconsin and north, then you got a shot at some big fish, right? Because I guide up at the Dells. I used to fish Sauk a lot, and I just got real sick of it, and I got real sick of taking off lower units and props. So, so now I fish up at the Dells in Lake Wisconsin in the spring. And there's a reason for that. There's just bigger fish up there. You have a legit shot at a, potentially 10, 11 pound fish at the Dells. 100%, absolutely. Could you do that at Sauk? Sure, maybe, but I wouldn't hold my breath. So as far as a slot limit would go on a system like this, it would be purely for us. And that's something to keep in mind, guys, is the big picture here with fisheries management. This is not a natural walleye fishery. This is not a natural muskie fishery. We put these things here so we can enjoy them, right? So we can manage, if we have the ability to stock and manage and regulate these populations, we can turn them into pretty much whatever we want to as long as it's biologically stable for the system. So a slot limit basically would give us more of those mid to upper 20-inch fish to just catch and release, which is fun. Who doesn't want to catch a big walleye? If I go walleye fishing, I don't want to go catch 12 inchers. I want to get 28 inchers, right? That'd be pretty fun. But then it goes back to how top heavy the system is. Bigger walleyes need more food. Things get a little more top heavy. So in a perfect world, if there was a little more food in the system, I would probably do a slot from 20 to like 27. Those all go back. And you can keep one over 27 and I'd probably still do 3. I don't think you need 5 a person, but I'd probably still do 3 from 15 to 20 or under 20. Yep. Personally, I'd rather eat a 15 over a 20 incher. That's just me. But that's personally what I would do.
In Canada, for the most part, it's 18 to 21.
Yes. Yep.
And that really seems to work.
It does. And what you're doing is by letting them get to that 18 to 20 inch mark, that fish has reached sexual maturity to the point where it has gone through at least one spawn cycle. So before that fish got plucked from the system, it's already at least reproduced one time. So that's why that works so well. Yeah, so I completely agree. Yep, I think that'd be great. And a 20-inch walleye is perfect. Perfect eater. If you have 3 of those, you're golden. You're all set.
You think walleyes reproduce though in the
There is some very minimal evidence to support that they can, and there's some very interesting theories as to why they don't. So actually, Austin Rogotsky, I'm sure some of you know the name Blue Ribbon Outdoors. Austin's a good buddy of mine, as well as Brian. And he kind of opened my eyes to this, which was kind of funny. If you look at where the fish are coming from, most of the fish that are getting stocked in the Madison Lakes as far as walleye go seem to be coming from the Rock River, or some from the Fox River as well. So you're taking river run fish, that are genetically disposed to spawning in a river and living in a river, and dropping them in a lake. They probably try to go through the motions. Obviously they do, right? You can go to Tenney Park in April and go look in the spillway, and there's just hundreds of walleyes, and there's some freaking big ones in there too. If you've never done that, go down like mid-April, or at least by the second week of April, go down to Tenney Park and look in the locks. It's just stupid. It'll make you sick. Those are all fish from Monona. It's just stupid. And obviously if you fish opener at Tenney, you already know that. So you're taking a river run fish, throwing it in a lake. They get a little confused, I think. Again, genetically disposed to being a river fish, not a lake fish. So there are lake spawners and there's river spawners, right? The majority, obviously, of the fish that are spawning in Mendota would be lake spawn fish, and there is very, very, very minimal evidence to show that there is some reproduction, but certainly not enough to keep up with angling pressure. And the other thing to remember too is the conditions, right? The habitat. Just because the water temp hits 44 degrees and it's a full moon in April and the walleyes are there and they're ready to go, it doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. There's so many environmental factors that come into play too. So if you look at Madison, right, we have sediment issues, right? with all the dredging and stuff we're doing now to try to get ahead of it, basically playing catch up. A lot of that sediment is why the muskies don't successfully reproduce in Madison, right? A lot of them run up to, Murphy Creek, up to Wingra in the river and stuff, up to Tenney. And a lot of the eggs just get silted over. They're broadcast spawners as well as walleyes. They just dump their eggs in the milt and they just let them go. They drift away and they find a nice cozy spot and they hatch, whenever it is they hatch, usually about a week later or so, or 2 weeks later. They get silted up and they're not viable. That's kind of the bottom line. There is some reproduction, I would say, coming from Lake Monona, though. The fish that do make it up the Yahara River up to Tenney Park, I would imagine that there is some reproduction happening there. So if you look at the stocking numbers, and again, this is like super pseudoscience, right? Because I don't have the actual data. I didn't go out and electrofish and Pike net and stuff. But if you look at the stocking numbers from Mendota down to Wabisa, Monona doesn't get any walleyes. Wabisa does. The numbers are ridiculously low compared to Mendota. Now, do some fish make it from Mendota down to Monona? Probably. Not a lot, but a few. It's kind of like muskies getting into Mendota, right? Are there muskies in there? Sure. Is there a targetable population of them? No, definitely not. Unless somebody in here knows something I don't know, in which case we should have a chat afterwards. But I've only ever seen 3 muskies in Lake Mendota in my entire life, and all 3 of them were tigers, which is interesting, and that's maybe another topic for discussion. But the walleye population in Lake Monona is amazing. It's actually very strong. And honestly, in my opinion, if I had to choose, I hate Kegonsa, so we're not even going to talk about Kegonsa. As a kid who grew up in Monona and fished Wabisa, Monona, Mendota my entire life, those are my 3 lakes. If I had to pick one lake to catch an absolute giant walleye, it's Lake Monona, hands down. There is so much freaking food in there. There is so much water for those big fish to just disappear into the basin. They hardly ever get touched. There are freaking giants in there. Like legit, you could go out there and catch a 10-pounder right now, probably. My biggest walleye out of Madison ever was 30 on the nuts. I didn't have a scale with me. It was probably somewhere between 8 and 9 pounds, and I caught it from shore in December, like 5 years ago at Olbrick, right off the breakwater. Literally, like right here. I saw it sitting there in my, at the time, fiance. I was like, dude, there's a freaking monster walleye right there. And she's like, you're full of shit. I'm like, no, really, there is. Oh, sorry, Facebook. And sure enough, I caught it, and it was a freaking whale, and it was really cool. So yeah, there are giants. But that being said, there are so many fish that I've seen in Monona that there has to be some natural reproduction happening between Wabisa and Monona, somewhere in there, because the stocking numbers in Wabisa just don't seem, in my opinion, to match what we're seeing for population. So I think there is some successful reproduction happening down there, but you've got the river, right? You've got all the Yahara River basically from the train trestle at the north end of Wabisa all the way to Squaw Bay. There's a little current in Squaw Bay too. You've got Murphy Creek up by Olbrick, and then you've got the river that goes up to Tenney. So there's a lot of potential spawning areas for those fish, and a lot of those places are gravel, kind of pea gravel bottom, which is perfect. That's exactly what they're looking for, especially a river run fish that got dumped in a lake. Where are they going to go? They're going to go find the current somewhere. So I believe there is a little bit of reproduction happening in the southern end of the chain, but as far as Mendota goes, very minimal, almost none. I think they go through the motions. I just don't think that it ends up resulting in viable young, kind of like the muskies. So that's just one idiot's opinion. I don't know. Any other questions? I like the fisheries management questions. These are kind of fun.
Now, where did you target,
For walleyes? That's a great question. So right now, if we had ice, the North Triangle in Monona Bay, where like everybody goes ice fishing, right by the bridge. And that's where everybody sucker fishes, right? You see boats spot locked there all the time with sucker rods out. The walleyes do the same thing, slide in and out, especially by those culverts kind of up on the north end. If you go out there like right now with a headlamp, I guarantee you there's probably like a 25-inch walleye just laying in that culvert. There always is, unless someone caught it already. Someone probably did. But yeah, they do creep around in there quite a bit. So early ice, I like Monona Bay. Squaw Bay is another really good one too, because of that current that comes down to the south end of the lake. I think the fish really like to relate to that. And then fish that are in the river right now that will eventually leave the river and push into deeper water. That, Squaw Bay area is kind of a nice transition where they can push into the basin. So early ice, basically any of the bays. About 6 to 10 feet of water, 12 feet of water or so. And then as winter goes on, you got the big rock pile off of Tony Watha right by Squaw Bay there. That has fish. That Capitol Bar out in the middle, you're probably going to have to fight some people to get on it. You can catch walleyes there as well. The mouth of the Yahara where it dumps in, you got to be so freaking careful. In fact, I shouldn't even talk about that. That's scary. But there's that big deep hole right there. There's kind of that big horseshoe that sticks out, that big point. Right off that rock point can be really good. And then that big dip right there between shore and that rock spine can be really good too. Usually a good perch spot too, but you have to be so freaking careful going over there. You got current, you got all kinds of stuff going on there, deep water. I usually just don't even mess with it, but that can be a really good spot too. And then right off in front of the terrace too, believe it or not, right off the riprap there, that's a pretty good spot too. Yeah. Oh, I bet. Oh, they freaking love it over there, especially because they can go like underneath the terrace and stuff and hang out and creep in there. I'm sure there's crappies and stuff in there all winter too and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, basically anywhere along John Nolan you can catch walleyes. Pretty safe bet. Any other questions, guys?
All right, everyone.
All right.
Thanks. Let's round of applause here for Noah.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah. We got a couple prizes to give away. Did everybody write their name on a blue ticket? Yeah,
You can't put that on me. Make them do it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, she's our resident ticket picker here. You want to do it again? You let your brother? You want to pick a ticket out of here, and we'll see who wins. Come up here now. Yeah. You want to pick a ticket? See who wins. This is for the. It's a $20 gift card and a T-shirt, DNS T-shirt. What do you got there? Let's see what it says. Dylan Anderson. All right, Dylan. I'll just have it up here, and this is a large T-shirt, but you can swap out for whatever fits. And then the other prize, since we're talking tip-ups, Beaver Dam tip-up.
Ooh.
Yeah, big one.
I should have grabbed a
You want to
ticket.
pick one more name? You can't win. Damn. One more out of there. Oh, admit one, it says. No. Peter Finnegan. Oh, there he is.
All right.
Hey, how you doing? All right. Well, thank everybody.